What's going on, everyone? Hunter and Kyle from Team Misfit HQ today, talking to you coaches about how to teach an athlete how to snatch for the first time. The most complicated lift in the world deserves a lot of patience and a lot of practice on both the coaching and the athlete side. So we're going to take you through kind of a pretty basic progression that will get the athlete understanding the movement enough to practice it safely, and then some points of performance to pay attention to as the coach in kind of the positions that we're going to go after. Before we get started, we have to understand that there's the prerequisite is that the athlete has learned at the bare minimum how to squat, how to air squat, and ideally deadlift. So they're comfortable picking the bar, a barbell, or a load off the floor in a mechanically safe position. I'm gonna start with him finding his jumping position. So before he even touches the barbell, we need to know where the athlete's feet need to be set up in the setup portion of the lift. And what I like to do is say, hey Kyle, imagine there's a basketball hoop right in front of you and you wanna touch that rim. I want you to take that step, load up like you're about to jump and touch the rim, but don't jump, okay? So go ahead whenever you're ready. Boom, okay? So if we look at Kyle's feet, for him, they're roughly under his hips, and because I am having him, kind of set up for that really explosive movement similar to a snatch, we can start by having the athlete effectively in this position. So I'm gonna grab a little piece of chalk, good enough starting position to get going, and I'm gonna put that chalk mark around Kyle's shoes so he knows he can be consistent with his setup position. Next thing is now Kyle knows how to air squat. We've confirmed that. Kyle, go ahead and find your air squat stance, whatever that is for you. And let me see an air squat and make sure we look mechanically sound. Yep, that looks pretty good. And now I'm gonna put another kind of chalk line where his feet go to show him, hey, this is where you should be landing every time you receive that barbell overhead. We've established the foot position. From here, we can ask Kyle to pick up that barbell. Next thing we need to make sure the athlete knows is where to put their hands. And this is really important. The first time athletes learn where their hands go on the barbell is also an opportunity to get them comfortable with the hook grip. As many of you remember, it's not super comfortable at first, but becomes second nature after a while. So Kyle, are able to show, remember that hook grip? Thumb is kind of wrapped underneath that index and middle finger to really lock that hook grip in. So he's got the barbell stood up. And what I'm looking for in this position as the coach is for that barbell to be resting in his hip crease, okay? And hip crease to the athlete is kind of like that, almost like that pubic bone area. It should be not on the upper kind of thigh muscle. It should be in kind of the bony part of their hip. So if Kyle were to bring his hands in like 3 inches, let's get belligerent with it. Keep going, yep. So that bar is now like in the upper thigh. Let's widen out the hands to make sure we're in that hip crease. And then the second thing is that now Kyle needs to bend his knees for me. Only bending his knees, let's push those knees out in this position, which we'll talk about in a bit, the power position. That barbell still needs to be resting in his hip crease with his elbows locked out and that hook grip engaged, okay? Again, if his hands were too narrow, we would see, go ahead, bring the hands in a little bit. He kind of looks like he's almost in the hip crease, but bend the knees a little bit. All of a sudden that bar slides down the thighs. That's not what we want. So I would have Kyle, let's widen out the hands a little bit. Good, bend the knees. Looks like the right position. Now, Kyle, take a look down where your hands are. These markers on a barbell are pretty universal, okay? Some bars have 2 markers, some have 1, but they're universal. So remember where your hands go. That's where they're gonna go every time you snatch or overhead squat. We've got the foot position, we've got the hand position. Now we need to make sure the athlete can safely overhead squat. So Kyle's gonna go ahead, get that bar locked out however is comfortable for him. Really pressing into that bar. Let's move the feet into that squat stance. And as you go through this, Kyle, remember we're actively pressing into the bar, just performing an air squat with a barbell overhead. Good, let's do one more. Just making sure the athlete's comfortable. Good, you can relax for a second. He's good. So we've got the foot position, we've got the hand position on the barbell, the athlete can overhead squat safely. Now it's time to start talking about the movement itself. Kyle's gonna get his barbell back in his hands, those feet in his jumping stance, and we're gonna talk first about the power position. the most important. We like to teach kind of a top-down approach, meaning we're gonna start kind of at the last point of contact before the barbell were to go overhead and progress down to the floor slowly. So in this position, Kyle's got his hook grip. I'm gonna say, Kyle, just bend your knees, pushing them out slightly. Perfect. That's the power position. As the coach, what I'm looking for here is a vertical torso. His shoulders are behind the bar, and his knees are slightly in front of the bar with that bar still resting in the hip crease, okay? What I don't want to see is Kyle, go ahead and lean back a little too far, okay? That's no bueno. More commonly, we see athletes kind of bend the knees and get a little out over that bar, so lean forward for me a little bit. In this position, the shoulders are in front of the bar. That's not what we're looking for. Let's get that upright position. That's the power position, okay? From here, we give the cue, jump and catch. Try to keep it as simple as possible. We're gonna extend the hips and knees, punch that bar into the ceiling, and let's see what happens. Go. Great. And what I'm looking for there is also for Kyle to try to land in his kind of receiving position in that squat stance, okay? And if he misses a little bit, especially for beginners, I'm gonna say, hey, let's slide those feet in a little bit with that bar overhead so you feel what that position looks like. Let's do another one. So go ahead and get in that power position, jump and catch. Terrific. Be deliberate with your athletes about this. If they're starting to catch with those kind of soft elbows, can you give us one with kind of a soft elbow receiving position, Kyle? Okay, and then they have to kind of press into that bar. Again, let's give athletes the cue, jump and punch. We want to have those elbows elbows straight when we receive the bar. It's a much safer position to be in. So you can relax for a second, Kyle. So we've got that power position. It's really important that we reiterate that that's the crux of the Olympic lifts. So in the next step here, we're gonna practice getting from the hang into that power position. So Kyle's kind of recovered here. I'm gonna stand tall. Now, to establish the hang position, kind of going down a position here, what we wanna do is have the athlete bend the knees slightly. We do not want them to go into that power position and then hinge at the waist. We lose a lot of tension in the hamstrings and glutes that way. So Kyle's gonna soften his knees just enough so he doesn't hyperextend them. He is then I'm gonna cue him to push his butt back, but keep your chest up and eyes forward. So we should have this nice hinging kind of movement pattern. In this position, what I'm looking for is kind of from the feet up. Kyle's feet are fully flat on the ground. He's still pushing his knees out like he was in the power position. Hips are back, obviously, behind that bar. Shoulders are out in front of the bar. Okay, Kyle, can you stand for a second? One common mistake we see with athletes is that they just sit down and slide that bar down their thighs to get into that hang position, okay? It's more comfortable than being kind of hinging out over the bar with those hamstrings on fire. But here we can see the shoulders are behind the bar, and this is not a position that athletes are ever gonna find themselves in, so we don't wanna train it. So Kyle, go ahead, stand back up. Again, let's soften the knees slightly. Push that butt back as if there was a bar stool behind you. Head and eyes are forward. Barbell is just slightly off the knee a little bit, but those shoulders are out in front of the bar with a nice rigid upper back. Now, what I'm gonna have Kyle do is very, very slowly, you're gonna start to lift your torso, aiming to get that bar back into the position that we just talked about and freeze. Beautiful, okay? Stand up, great, and let's find that hang position again. So I'm gonna have the athlete do this multiple times to get the idea. Find that hang position, shoulders are in front of the bar, great. We've got active lats here, sweeping that bar close. Go ahead again, nice and slowly sweep into that power position, and you can just stand. Great. Once the athlete has the understanding of how to get that bar from the hang into the power position, I'll start to have them snatch from the hang. And for the first couple reps, I'm gonna have Kyle pause actually. So he'll get to the hang, he's gonna really slowly get into that power position, pause briefly, and then I'll give him the cue to jump and catch. Again, receiving that bar in the correct stance with a power snatch. So we're still not squatting yet. Go ahead and now get out in that hang position. Really, really slowly. Pause. Great, okay? I'll have the athlete do that a couple times with the pausing, and then once they demonstrate the proficiency to hit those positions, let's go back down to the hang. I still want you to go really slow, but don't pause in the power position, okay? Jump and catch. Okay, beautiful. Kyle's still moving his feet out into that receiving position while he's hitting those positions correctly. One thing that we see a lot of times once we start to add kind of speed and a dynamic element to the movement is athletes like to go with that starfish kind of position, okay? So Kyle, I want you to demo kind of a bad one. Let's get those feet a little too wide. Freeze, okay? So if we have an athlete who looks like this, I'm gonna cue him. I want you to keep that bar overhead, but let's move the feet back where they belong, okay? Feel that position. That's where I want you to try to land. Go ahead, bring the bar back down. Let's reset in front of the knee and give me one more trying to land in that correct position. He did. Terrific. Okay? That's great. Now we start to go to the floor. The knee is where a lot of things go wrong, but we need to get athletes set up under that floor position. So sometimes it might be easier. You can also have a barbell set up off to the side with plates on it so that there's a little bit of a counterbalance for that athlete. But we want to still try to stay with the empty barbell or PVC pipe for kind of as long as we safely can. So Kyle's going to do that. He's going to start by bringing that barbell down in front of the shin. And he's going to have to hang out here for a sec because we're going to talk about the setup position. So in our setup position, again, kind of floor up. Kyle's still got his feet flat. His knees are driving out. Exact same thing we were looking for before. Hips are obviously behind the bar and lower than in a deadlift. Important to denote that the hips are in a different position here. Shoulders are out over the bar, either kind of over that barbell or slightly in front, and the eyes are looking forward. You can relax for a second, Kyle. Long time to hang out in that position. Okay? Big thing that we're looking for from the coach, take that profile view. Make sure that those shoulders are slightly in front of the bar and the hips aren't kind of at shoulder level, okay? If we set those hips up too high, athletes are gonna pull off the floor with their back. We want them pulling off the floor with their legs. Okay? And similar to what we did with the kind of knee to hip, I'm going to have Kyle do the same thing from the floor to the knee. Okay? And what this is going to do is allow me as a coach to say, Kyle, really, really slowly, I want you just to deadlift that bar to your knee. Okay? Kyle knows what he's doing, but what I'm looking for as the coach is for the shoulders and hips to rise at roughly the same rate and for that barbell to take a straight path from the ground to that knee position, okay? If Kyle were to open up his torso really, really soon, that barbell goes out and around the knee, which we don't want, okay? Back down to the start. Similarly, if the athlete lets those hips shoot way up too fast, hips come up faster than the shoulders, and Kyle also doesn't really have any place to go with his legs from here. So go ahead, you can relax for a sec if you need to. We're good? Okay, so Kyle's in that setup position. Let's go to the knee one more time. Terrific. From here, let's go into that power position. Jump and catch. Beautiful. Okay, flagpole for just a second. So he's got those positions. Now we want to start to eliminate some of the pauses if possible. We can still inject them later on if athletes are having trouble kind of understanding where they need to be in what position. Pauses are a great way to do that. But Kyle's moving pretty well. So now we're going to start to get rid of pauses. So what you're going to do is you're going to be in your setup position. I'm still going to have you pause at the knee, but after that, you're going to slowly get into that power position and jump and catch without pausing, okay? So he's in that setup position, shoulders in front, head and eyes are looking straight forward. Go ahead, position one, and slowly power snatch. Great. Have the athlete do that 3 or 4 times, and then once they're ready, we get rid of all of those pauses. So go ahead and get down in that mid shin, and now essentially what we would call a tempo pull power snatch, where Kyle slowly pulls that bar. We're looking to hit those positions, jump and catch, feet land in the correct spot, okay? So we've got the positions hit now, and we've done the power snatch variations, and now it's time to add the overhead squat. And all that we do for that is we restart back at the top, because repeatability or repeating kind of positions is super important for new folks. But this time once you land, I want you to pause for a second. If you find that your feet went too wide or too narrow, With that bar overhead, I want you to adjust your feet to get in the perfect overhead squat position and then perform an overhead squat. So Kyle gets in his power position. Sorry, we'll go power position first, Kyle. Okay, power position, jump and catch, freeze right there. Okay, his feet look like they're great. Go ahead, perform an overhead squat. Beautiful, okay? Have the athlete perform a few of those reps. Again, let's say Kyle jumps way too wide. Go ahead, jump and catch. Okay, keep that bar overhead. Let's move those feet in for me, Kyle. Perform an overhead squat. Okay, we don't want to omit that overhead squat, especially for newer athletes. We have to get them comfortable with that movement. It's super common in CrossFit. It's also a hugely functional movement. So as long as it's safe for the athlete, get them working through that range of motion repeatedly as well. And then we're just going to take the same mechanics and apply that down into the hang position. Okay, we're going to keep things really slow. No pauses this time, Kyle. Whenever you're ready, go ahead, jump and catch. Freeze. Okay, he landed maybe a tiny bit wide. Let's adjust closer and overhead squat. Beautiful. Go ahead, bring that bar back down, and let's go down to the floor in that mid shin. No pauses, but really, really slow. Great, we're out over the bar, back into the hip, jump and catch, feet landed in a good spot, overhead squat, and he goes through that overhead squat, okay? Now, we want the athlete to start getting the idea of the fact that this lift, ideally, in the perfect world, you're only gonna pull the bar to about here and you are gonna catch it all the way in the bottom of a squat. And that seems probably pretty daunting to most athletes, and the odds that they're gonna hammer that on the first go is pretty low, but we're working towards that. So all I'm gonna have Kyle do now is we're gonna go through from the top down again, but he's just gonna minimize the amount of time he's pausing between when he catches the bar and performs that overhead squat. And me as the coach, if he starts moving too fast, I can rein him in a little bit, but if the positions look good, then we won't. So let's go ahead, power position, Kyle. And if you can, kind of catch it probably a little bit above parallel, but right into that overhead squat. Power position, go. Good, so a small pause, but that's better. Okay, let's try to get even less of a pause if you can. Power position, go. Yeah, terrific, not too bad. And we slowly start to get rid of those pauses, trying to get the athlete to receive that bar lower and lower. Then we'll go down to the hang, go out in front of that knee, still with a nice slow tempo pull. Good, and then finally we'll go to the floor. Beautiful, okay? So, when we're teaching the athlete to snatch, repetition, repetition, repetition. That's really the name of the game, is to don't be overzealous as the coach to get the athlete moving on to the next position if they haven't hit the first position, that kind of initial position, correctly. It is far, far easier to teach an athlete who's completely never done the movement before to teach them how to do this correctly than it is to correct 3, 5, even sometimes 10 years of movement patterns that just that are preventing athletes from lifting more weight. So there you have it. That's how to take an athlete who's never performed a barbell snatch before, or PVC pipe snatch, to get them at least proficient, understanding the positions that they're supposed to be in. But again, most importantly, it's our job as coaches to really, really, really hammer home those kind of basic points and the positions, and don't let athletes get away with moving poorly, especially when they're learning. You're doing them a disservice by not forcing them to do the movement correctly, because a few weeks down the road when they're snatching beautifully, you'll have yourself to thank for that. So there you have it, guys. If you like what you see, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Follow us at Team Misfit Gyms on Instagram. And if you're interested in getting your affiliate or your gym on board with Team Misfit affiliate programming, where we program snatching, we program a ton of positional work to get athletes better at these movements, you can head to teammisfit.com or the Sugar Wad Marketplace, get a free 2-week trial. We'll see you in the next one.